Uh, the key thing to keep in mind for shipping, let me throw it into three general categories. Number one, 80% of the stuff that enables people to grow food is transported internationally, whether it's equipment or fertilizer or fuel. Only 20% of food is traded internationally, but 80% you need the inputs to grow it in the first place. Number two, roughly half of all oil is shipped on the ocean blue, typically by supertanker, along with everything that comes out of the Persian Gulf. And then number three, safety on the waves is what allows us to have the East Asian manufacturing model, which is a fancy way of saying the manufacturing model. Because roughly half of all manufactured goods are produced in East Asia, is less than 1% of that shipping happens on land. Korea is in effect an island. Japan is an island. Most of the Southeast Asian countries are either islands or peninsulas, and they're ringed by mountains. So physical connections independent of maritime trade in Asia almost don't happen at all. You know, the book is about how this happens on a decade's time scale, how the 2020s were always the decade that it was always going to break down in. But events in just the last couple of months are speeding this up. A lot of this is probably going to be front loaded. So like, think of what just happened in the first week of December. So the Europeans announced their plan for an oil export ban, and a lot of the details are being made up as they go on. It's a very European policy in that regard. But what it is encouraging is a split in the way we view oil from the Russian space versus the rest of the world, and the different types of crude coming out of the Russian space. So the stuff the Europeans are primarily concerned about is Urals crude that is exported west to the European space. And that can only be sold for $60 or less now. And that's affecting insurance and shipping rates and the type of vessels that go in. And we saw over the course of the last 2 years how disruptions in simply the type of vessel being available can generate supply chain snarls. So now we're doing this with energy. But there's also a crude grade that exports to the Pacific that doesn't touch the European space at all, that trades differently. We now, just in the Russian space, have two fundamentally different markets, not just for pricing, but for physical accessibility, for the ability to get ships and insurance to allow it to move. One of the reasons why the world has been so stable, air quotes stable, since 1945, is there's been one oil price. Now, it's modified by the length of the journey or the quality of the crude, but there's one oil price and everything is safe. The Europeans have now created a system where a lot of countries in Europe are now going to have a vested interest in interfering with Russian exports west. That's one pricing margin. That's one security paradigm. That's one insurance policy system. But then in the East, where the Europeans are not the players, it's a different crude grade at a different price point using different insurance systems by different countries. We have split the oil market now into at least three pieces, two Russian, one everything else, which means now countries no longer have a vested interest in making sure the oil flows everywhere all the time because we're not all in this together anymore. Yeah, in the world before World War II, piracy, state piracy, and privateering were pretty common because almost everything that was shipped had an obvious value. The cost of shipping before the Cold War and globalization was about an order of magnitude more than it was previous. And in the pre-industrial world, it was an order of magnitude more than that. In the pre-deepwater era, it was an order of magnitude more. So interfering with shipping has always been very popular because you know that the value of the product is going to be high. It's only in the post-World War II era that the cost of shipping has dropped so much that we put everything on the waves. So that's intermediate manufacturing, that's low value added commodities, things that normally you would produce and consume locally. It used to be it was all pretty much luxury goods or something of very high value. Now it's a little bit of everything. So iPhone chargers, the components that might go into the knockoff iPhone chargers.
Right.
The Biden administration is the most populist administration we have ever had, more so than Trump. Basically, it feels like on trade policy, the Biden administration is going through Trump's tweets and picking them out one at a time and expanding them into position papers and putting them into policy and running a really good grammar scrubber over it. And we're basically getting the second Trump administration right now from a trade point of view. And then second, even if we wanted to intervene, this isn't the 60s or 70s. I mean, it used to be that there were no other naval powers. And so the United States with a destroyer-heavy Navy after World War II could patrol the global oceans because there wasn't a lot of competition and we had the right tools for the job. But since 1990, we've retooled our Navy, we've retired most of our smaller vessels, and we've concentrated naval power into our supercarrier battle groups. And if you want to knock off a country, that is the tool. But if you want to patrol the global oceans in an environment where other people have ships, you don't need the dozen supercarrier battle groups we have. You need like 800 destroyers. We only have 70. So even if we wanted to be the global policeman and patrol the waves, we no longer have the physical capacity to do it. Now, that sounds bad, and it is, but keep this in mind. The United States is the least maritime trade-dependent country in the world. Only 12% of our GDP is from trade. About half of that is NAFTA. So we're not the ones who suffer if global trade breaks down. China's at the top of that list. Europe is a close second. And it utterly lacks the naval capacity to project power more than about 1,000 miles from its coast. And it is completely dependent upon resource access and market access in countries that are half a world away. The Chinese currently have 3 aircraft carriers floating. The first one used to be a casino that they converted. They will never claim that is
an actual
casino in Ukraine. Yeah, they will never claim that it is combat capable. They just bought it from Ukraine to refurbish it so they could learn how it works. Their second one is a clone of the one that used to be the casino. The one that used to be the casino used to be a Russian carrier. They called it the Kuzanov, by the way, and the Soviets thought it was a disaster. During Soviet times, with Soviet resources, it just kind of caught on fire from time to time. Anyway, so the Chinese do not claim that these two will ever be combat capable. They're training for their engineers more than anything else. And they do have a third one that they're going through sea trials right now. And it is a larger carrier that they actually designed themselves. But again, it's a prototype. They don't view it as anything other than a test bed. So they might get their first carrier in 2027. So you've got the greater Midwest, which is the world's largest single chunk of arable land in the world, high agricultural productivity. It's directly overlain by the greater Mississippi system, which is the largest natural transport network in the world. And if you compare a modern superhighway system like the American interstate system to moving things by water, the cost of operation is about 1/12 to do it by water versus land. So we've got the best waterway network on the best bulk production zone. We've got more port potential on just the east coast of the United States than the rest of the world combined. The internal waterway network is bigger than all of the internal waterway networks of the rest of the world combined.
Really?
Canada's on the other side of a bunch of deep lakes and forests. Mexico's on the other side of some mountains and some deserts. And we've got ocean moats. So great economic potential, great defensive potential. China technically is a larger country than the United States, but about 2/3 of its land is either too hot or too dry or too cold to be inhabitable. So 95% of the population lives on 1/3 of the land.